help companies really focus in on increasing capacity by providing the needed clarity in terms of their strategy, people, process, and technology. I have a workshop that's going on this Thursday, and the address for the workshop and registering is at the very bottom of this current page. It's thescalingmethod.com/strategies. And I definitely would appreciate as many people in this audience joining me as possible. It'd be great to have all of you there. So with that, let me focus in on our guest for today. In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Ravi Samavedam, the Chief Innovation Officer for the Azzur Group. With over 2 decades of experience in the biotech and pharma industries, Ravi is a seasoned biochemical engineer who's worn many hats throughout his career. And so with that, welcome, Ravi.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. I greatly appreciate it. Can you just walk us through your journey from being a biochemical engineer to becoming the Chief Innovation Officer at Azzur Group?
Sure. Yeah, so this is about 23 years ago that I started working in the biotech industry after my grad school in biochemical engineering. I worked at Baxter, Shire, and Amgen. And most of the work that I was doing there was related to commercialization of products. So the final mile, the process validation batches, the release of those batches, regulatory submissions related to commercialization. And then in 2012, I started with Azzur as a practice leader running the consulting office in the Boston area. And very soon, I started working at the other extreme end of manufacturing, which is first entry into clinical trials, companies getting into GMPs for the first time, helping startups scale their organizations to be able to be manufacturers. A lot of the positions that I held as a consultant was head of quality, head of manufacturing, and so on. That's where I got that early phase experience. So yeah, my experience in the industry combined with the experience at Azure has sort of well-rounded me in terms of the various life cycles of product manufacturing, mostly in biopharma, a little bit of med device.
Very good. Yeah, and it's interesting to me always to kind of listen to the journey that people go through in terms of their career. What made you decide to make that switch though to go to Azure?
Sure. The experiences that I got in the industry, like I mentioned, Baxter, Amgen, and then Shire, there's amazing experiences. Big pharma, big biotech companies, very mature processes. But then, the contributions individually for me was it didn't feel like it was making a difference. I was a, small cog in a wheel, so to speak. Uh, and the appeal for going and doing consulting was just learning how various companies approach the same problems. Also, getting the exposure to various sort of technologies, processes, and companies that you could get through consulting. That was the appeal initially. But then, very soon, the ability to have the freedom to start your own business, lack of a better word, was what was continuing to appeal to me in terms of staying with Azure as an option for my career. Going from consulting on a day-to-day basis to be able to find a business that actually adds value tremendously to the industry. The business called Clean Rooms on Demand that we've started, that really couldn't have happened without Azure's help. So the entrepreneurial spirit, within all of us at Azure, that has helped build these businesses within Azure, is testament to how the core values within Azure allow companies and individuals at the end of the day to fulfill dreams.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it is something that I definitely can resonate with as well because I in my journey, I've found that a lot of the companies inside of the space that I enjoy working with, overall have that level of innovation and they want to, change things overall for the better inside of, healthcare. And in some larger organizations, it feels like you become a smaller and smaller piece of actually having that impact. And then, inside of, organizations like Azure, it sounds like you definitely can, reach out and have, more of an impact yourself.
That's right. Being able to solve big problems is so much easier when you have more influence and more capacity to actually, go after that innovative idea that you may have, which is very difficult to do in a big company environment. Now, having said that, Azure is getting big as well. But the beauty is, to have the courage to say, look, we will at least look at the next big idea that somebody comes up with, and then give it enough credence to be able to convert that into a potential revenue generating opportunity, but more importantly, something that would help the industry overall.
Yeah. So, as chief innovation officer, what does your typical day look like?
Yeah, so my role is really to look at potential adjacencies that we can grow into as a company, other solutions that we can be providing to our same clients that are currently in our portfolio. So one example would be our clean rooms on demand business, which is a hybrid model that sits right between owning your own internal manufacturing infrastructure or relying on a third party such as a CDMO or a CMO. For startups who are looking to conserve capital, it's a quick way to test their molecules in the clinic without having the burden of ownership of capital infrastructure and the burdens associated with that. So, we are looking to expand on that business by finding adjacencies, things that we can add on in terms of services to the current offerings that we have. Maybe get into process equipment, maybe into disposables that are required for processing, all around cell and gene and associated biopharma processes. Yeah, it's an exciting it's an exciting role because every day is different. You're talking to these potential partners that would come in and add adjacencies to your business. Very different from a biochemical engineer that I was trained to be, which is the appeal of the role, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, just to take kind of a broader look at your background as well, though. I mean, it seems like you have experience in technical operations and quality and validation as well. So, I mean, you have, a lot of different skills, as well, where you could probably have a lot of different, perspectives on that. How does that sort of shape your approach to innovation?
Yeah, so I guess the exposure to a variety of areas has let me be very good at assessing risk, right, for
Mhm.
companies. So I can intelligently speak to the various personas within a company and give them a perspective of what to look out for in terms of potential pitfalls, so to speak. So I have the, I'm fortunate enough to have been exposed to those various organizations within biotechnology to be able to speak intelligently in a variety of areas, right? Whether it be materials or equipment or facilities. Yeah, so yeah, hence the ability to speak to the highest levels within companies to before they make that big investment, whether it be capital or personnel, right? So yeah.
Sounds like you get started at a very early sort of cycle as well. Where do clients normally come to Azure? When do you start interacting with them?
So unfortunately, not early enough. you know, um, so a lot of clients come to us after having a bad experience with a third party, after having realized the actual timelines of going building your own facility for manufacturing. We'd actually like to capture them even early on, where they are looking at Azure Clean Rooms on Demand as the third option, right alongside building or buying, which are the two traditional options, right? Whether it be internal manufacturing or outsourced manufacturing, we want clean rooms on demand to be the third option that everybody is considering before going and investing that huge amount of capital in terms of dollars as well as human capital.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely understand that, and I mean, there's there's a lot of organizations that I interact with as well, where they try and scale their own organization by themselves, and that I can understand why we have a lot of smart people in our industry, but at the same time, it's the discussion that we oftentimes have is through working with my organization. It sounds like similar with Azure, that you gain speed, you gain experience, you gain all these other things that kind of come as just a more or less, things that come along with our standard offerings. And it sounds to me like it's a lot similar to the way that you work with organizations as well.
Exactly. Allow them to focus on what their strengths are, which is the science. The core competency is the development of that molecule. Why invest time and resources in something that may or may not go beyond, say, clinical phase one? So, in that example of internal manufacturing, early on in clinical life cycle of products, it makes no sense to go build a massive infrastructure if majority of these assets are destined to fail in early phase of
Right.
clinical trials, right? So yeah, those sort of examples can be extended to other areas. But being able to provide at least an option that is faster, that would hopefully take that hundreds of molecules that go into the top of funnel, and at the end a few come out as commercially viable products. Hopefully, we're able to both increase the funnel, but also make the journey faster, so that you get to a point, whether it be success or failure, much faster, so that you can again go and pivot and focus on something that may be a different program much faster. So at the end of the game, it's all about acceleration, right? So,
Yeah.
Azure Clean Rooms on Demand, the business that I've been talking about, that's what it does. It gives you the opportunity to, at a lower footprint in terms of capital, go and test out your products. Whether it be destined to pass or fail, you get to that decision point much quicker.
Oh, very good. What are some of the most challenging aspects of your role, and then how do you overcome them?
Educating our client base, that is probably the biggest challenge that we have seen. um, a lot of the innovation happens in a very secretive fashion, right? A lot of the startups are in stealth mode as well, especially the clients that we are targeting through our Azure Clean Rooms on Demand business. It's the early phase cell and gene therapy innovators. Intellectual property protection is very key for them. So in a lot of those companies, it's very difficult for them to be able to see beyond the traditional models that are out there, right? To be able to see the value in acceleration, which, because honestly they haven't seen it, right? They haven't experienced that need thus far. So educating is a big challenge. The ability to for us to find the right partners for these startups to excel in our clean rooms. For example, they may be ready with their science to start manufacturing, but the equipment delays may be putting them behind, right?
Right.
Availability of personnel or talent may be a challenge for them. So some of these adjacent requirements for the industry, which are sort of beyond our direct control, are also challenges that we are dealing with.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I'm very familiar in terms of the long cycle time and the lead times for a lot of the equipment in our industry, and it seems like there's so many hurdles that every company has to kind of overcome in the in the process as well, and many times seeing out over the horizon and knowing what challenges may come and what delays may come, that could further impact the timeline is critical.
Yeah, and you asked me how we are trying to overcome some of those challenges, right? So we already are providing some equipment that the industry would need, mostly non-product contact, things like incubators, refrigerators, freezers, control rate freezers, things of that nature. But we also are working with the cell and gene therapy equipment providers out there to see if we can get either faster lead times or actually have equipment that can be deployed on demand in our facilities.
Hmm.
uh, you know, have drug product filling dedicated clean rooms that are ready to go, for specifically designed for filling of cell and gene therapy type of products. Yeah, those sort of innovations, we're trying to get into as well.
It's extremely important. So Azure has a unique hybrid model that allows companies to focus on, getting to the clinic faster. Can you talk a little bit more about how the model works?
Yeah. So as I've been saying, the traditional manufacturing options, especially for early phase clinical, is twofold: outsource to a CDMO or a CMO, and then the second option is build your own infrastructure. Our hybrid model are these facilities that are already qualified to GMP standards, are already equipped with the services that are required for all the ancillary services such as materials management, asset management, electronic systems required for various aspects of GMP manufacturing, so that a startup can quickly transition from a research and development organization to an early phase clinical GMP manufacturing organization without having to worry about facility, related compliance issues without having to worry about materials management, and a plethora of services that can be accessed on an on demand basis, but on an a la carte basis. So while this is ideal for startups, it also works for a somewhat mature company that may not require all the services that we have. So really flexible offering designed for speed.
And I feel like you just touched on this just a second ago in the later part of your answer, but what types of companies typically benefit most from coming to Azure Group?
Startups that are going into GMP for the first time, companies that have existing infrastructure but have a sudden need. A great example would be recently, Moderna Therapeutics is one of our clients in our Burlington, Massachusetts facility. They came to us in 2021 needing to address the pandemic. We happen to have capacity that we were building out. Now, Moderna obviously has internal capacity, had capacity at that time as well, but you cannot just turn on capacity instantly, right? There's a GMP readiness that needs to happen as well. So that's an example where it's a company that has internal infrastructure capacity but needs overflow capacity. So that's another type of client that we see quite often. And then, last but not least, the CDMOs out there that may not be catering to products and companies that have a very small volume of batches suddenly can utilize our capacity that's ready to turn on. As long as they have the expertise to make product and the equipment, our facilities are enabled to house especially cell and gene therapy processes pretty quickly. So now that's another way of addressing the capacity crunch that may be out there in cell and gene, especially for these small batches.
Yeah, I mean, and it feels like given where the different technologies and things like are at in our space, that more of this idea of having small to medium batches, is just going to continue to run throughout our industry, just because of wanting more and more personalized medicine.
Exactly. The development timelines have shrunk too, right? You need rapid methodologies to get from one phase of the clinic to the other, for example, right? The traditional approaches of scale up, stainless steel facilities, map processes, that's very different from today's cell and gene therapy personalized medicine world, right? Where it's scale out more than scale up. You may need more of the same footprint in the same facility, more so than larger footprints of the same processes, right? So yeah, in these new innovative technologies and processes, the need to flex and transition from one phase to the other, from one product to the other, is much more than before in traditional processes and molecules. So yeah, we do need more innovations to accelerate, the life cycle of critical therapies.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like this has led us, more or less to this next question, which is really, what are the current trends in phase appropriate CGMP implementation, and how is Assure Group staying ahead of that curve?
Yeah, so the phase appropriate GMPs are based on basically the risk that any given manufacturing activity poses, right? So, for example, early phase clinical manufacturing, you're talking about a handful of patients potentially. So the risk at that stage is lower compared to a commercial drug that's out there for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of patients. So you can approach early phase clinical manufacturing with a lesser focus on the rigor of GMP, right? Because you really don't know at that point what's critical to quality even. You're developing your process, you're characterizing your unit operations. So by the time you get to the point where you actually can claim that you can sustainably make good quality product, it's really later phases of the clinic and commercial, right? So the expectation from the agency is not to have an airtight GMP control right from the first clinical batch, because honestly, you don't have that. You don't need that. So that's the approach we take: is base it on risk, right?
Mm.
Do a risk assessment on what's really critical to either the clinical batch or to the patient, more so than the GMP expectations for a commercial product, right? So that way you conserve capital early. You don't have to go through a lot of hurdles, self-created hurdles that are really not required. Especially you're talking about if you're talking about unit operations that are not drug product, the final, drug product filling operation or something like that. So you can, conserve capital. More importantly, you can be faster and leaner early phases of the clinic.
Yeah, very important, overall to have a partner as well that can match, the needs of the industry as well, like Assure Group. So there are a few questions that I like to ask every leader. I definitely appreciate, all of the time that everybody spends with me on these different podcasts. And one of the key things that I love to learn from people is what are one of the best leadership advice, that you've gotten in your career, and then what how overall has that influenced you?
Let's see. I guess one liner that I really liked is don't let perfect in the way of good, right?
Mm.
The other way of saying it is, which I guess I have developed over time, and I say it now to some folks, is the pursuit of perfection is only worth it if you know the futility of it. What that really means is, perfection really doesn't exist, right? It's on the in the eye of the beholder, just like
Right.
beauty. So if you try to achieve it, the journey is great because you're trying to achieve something that's greater than today. But to expect to achieve it is kind of just, and it's not a viable proposition. Look for quick wins on a day-to-day basis for that long-term, path towards excellence, perfection, whatever you want to call it. But make sure that you have a backstop and you have a risk mitigation to whether it be overspending or distraction. So have that sort of moderation in terms of pursuit of perfection versus reality and practicality.
Yeah, I always feel like the people who really embrace this idea of the pursuit of perfection, if you continually are doing it, kind of this Kaizen approach where you're, on a path of continuous improvement, it can create almost like a flywheel effect where you're continually, sort of making the organization a little bit better, piece by piece. And there's so many people that sort of go into this with, well, I need a big impact. I need, several big things that we've sort of, moved out of the way or have improved. And I just think, I was talking to somebody else, recently, just saying the same thing. I think that's kind of the wrong thought process in this. Instead, you have to, we're in business primarily, to play the long game, and you don't want to sacrifice quality. You also don't want to sacrifice safety. And in that process of trying to go fast and have a big result, oftentimes those are the risks that you're taking. Is, am I going to at some level impact quality or safety? And I feel like,
Right.
it's a great journey to be on. Yeah.
Right. Actually, to tie it back to biotechnology and phase appropriateness, right? So that's a good way to look at it as well. Look, if early on in your product life cycle, if you are aiming perfection, you better know that there is nothing called perfection that early on, because you're again learning your process, you're developing your critical quality attributes. That's where you need to be phase appropriate. So the journey to commercialization and impeccable GMPs is great, but at the end of the day, it is a journey, especially early on in your product life cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. So there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
What inspires me is the fact that I can actually make a difference in the industry. I can actually show the industry a way to get faster than where it was, a few years ago, where it is today. Yeah, I
Yeah.
take real pride in that.
Really important, and to know your overall impact in the industry as well. What concerns you?
The resistance to change and lack of speed, right? And rightfully so. It is a very important role that the industry is playing, right? Critical therapy, saving lives. But there is a lot of resistance to change just because of the old ways, the traditional ways that we know. I would go ahead and actually say that innovation is going much faster than people who are ready to embrace it,
Mm.
right? I'll give you a great example. Most of the manufacturing happens in cell and gene therapy in closed processes, use of single use technologies. Traditional environmental monitoring, cleaning of facilities really is overkill. But I don't see many quality people out there that say, you know what? look, my process is completely closed. Why do I even need to do environmental monitoring around the equipment, right? I don't see people coming out and saying, hey, let's question it. So that's one of the issues that I see is resistance to change. And yeah, but it has to happen, right? When innovations get stifled, and things come in the way, the innovations find a way to overcome that. So,
Yeah, and I do think, I mean, I oftentimes see this sort of, I see the lag, but then I also see the exactly what you're describing, where people stay with the old ways of doing things, right? So my example is, like you said, with single use technologies, right? So a vendor releases single use technologies that then would benefit the industry in this way. Even though now the industry accepts the technology, they oftentimes don't go back and sort of remodify the processes with all of the open mindedness that I think they could have in terms of what could we absolutely eliminate, to your point, that we don't need because of sort of the direction that we've gone. Instead, it's like, well, we've always done it this way. We have procedures that already support this. It'd be a lot of additional work to go back and rework all of that, even though we've accepted the new technology. And I find it interesting because I mean, there's so many more levels of improvement that I feel like would benefit organizations if they just fully adapted.
yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of companies say they are risk based, right? We have risk management principles, but I think that's where the industry is lacking as well. Because in a lot of ways, if you look at the innovations that have happened, the technologies, over the years, especially disposables, and how close the processes are today compared to even a few decades ago, right? It's night and day. So the inherent risk level of these processes have actually gone down. Now, there may be some specific processes, unit operations that may have gotten riskier
Mhm.
because of the newness of the technology and so on. But in general, right, technology has really helped the processes become more robust, more reliable, the monitoring systems being more reliable. So yeah, I think there are more to come. There's a lot more exciting innovations like that to come. The one thing that I hope is someday we can have biotech in a box, like lack of a better word, right? A bedside point of care manufacturing, so to speak, and deployment of clinical products or even commercial products. That'd be the brave new world.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. It will be an interesting time for sure. Last question, what excites you?
The future, things like we have been talking about, right? Autologous cell therapy, for example, happening in hospitals, right, where the actual patient's blood is being collected, and it can go back into the same patient right there. Maybe that's an innovation that's going to be groundbreaking. There's so many others that people are coming up with that the future is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ravi, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success podcast and sharing with me about the Azzur Group and all the great things that you have going on inside the organization. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Don. Thanks.